We've been talking about marriage over the last few weeks. I am saying a prayer of thanksgiving that I will be done talking about marriage tonight. And so if you have not been here for any of that, I have reiterated each time, I do not like talking about marriage to folks with the person who knows how wrong I do these things sitting right there, because there are a lot of things that I have read, studied, looked at about marriage, seen in seminars and books and everything else, that I've thought, man, I should really do that better than I do it. And it doesn't take long for that to kind of fade with me, and I get back to where I was. And I have moments where things probably go well, and she would probably tell you that, I hope, somewhere along the way. But at the same time, I don't always do things the way I should. And so tonight is an encouragement for people like me who look at these seasons as we've looked at them and thought to yourself, you know, I may be in one that I don't want to be in right now. And this is a good reminder to us that you are not stuck there. You do not have to say, well, my marriage is this kind of marriage and that's just what it is. You have the capability of doing something about that. And I will tell you, by the way, even if you feel like you're the only one in the marriage trying to make an effort in that direction, you still can help move the needle a little bit. And you still can help change things some. So we have talked about, I believe way back in week one, we talked about winter, and we talked about when marriage, no, we talked about spring in week one, didn't we? We talked about spring initially, when marriage is kind of new and exciting and everything seems like it's just going to be perfect, and it's kind of like the springtime of life. You've got all this new growth and things going on around you. And then the second week, we talked about fall and winter. And so fall seems on the surface to be pretty, and it's the changing of leaves and all of that stuff that you see. But you also know that if you see all the colors of fall, that in about 2 weeks, what you're going to see is sticks. And it's just a bunch of bare trees out there. And when marriage begins to go into winter, it almost feels kind of like this cold, bleak hopelessness. And for a lot of people in our world, when they reach that point, that's kind of the point where people give up on marriage. And they assume that it will not be something that can ever be better. This is just kind of the cycle that they have gone through that's going to lead to things falling apart. Tonight we're going to talk about summer, and then we're going to talk about kind of the ability to change those seasons around and to make them better. And we'll begin with the same baseline we've begun with every time in Ephesians 5, kind of the place we go to in the New Testament when it comes to marriage. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he may sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. So we've been looking through this series at the book, The 4 Seasons of Marriage by Gary Chapman, and we have started each time with kind of his description of what the season may look like. Now we are here in summertime, and I don't know how you feel about summertime. Usually every time the heat begins in summer, you have someone who asks a question like, would you rather have the cold of winter or the heat of summer? And usually the time that question is asked is either one of those Oklahoma days where it's about 105 and there is no escape anywhere you go. I have found in my house is really well insulated except for the garage because that's a place you can save money and most people don't care. But I know it's hot as soon as I open the door from the laundry room into the garage. I don't have to get out in the sunlight. I don't have to go outside. As soon as I open that door, I think, oh man, it's going to be one of those days. And it's just hot. And then on the other end of it, and we had this winter, you have the ice and the cold and all of that. And for each of us, I know our preference is neither when it comes down to it, but if we had to choose one or the other, we have reasoning why we would do that. We hate the bitter cold because it seems you just can't escape it. And at the same time, I am of the nature that says you can always put another layer on. And you can always try to warm up a little more somehow or get by a fire or in a heated room, but it seems like the heat, there's just no escape. And I know as soon as I leave here tonight, there will be those of you who argue with me about that, and that's fine. But he describes summer in this way. It's kind of the pleasant side of summer. Fun is the theme of a summer marriage. Life is beautiful. We're reaping the benefits of our hard efforts to understand each other and to work together as a team and to see the dreams of spring fulfilled. The anticipation of spring has turned into the reality of summer. The initial excitement may have waned, but our sense of connection with each other has deepened. We have fewer misunderstandings, and when we do, resolutions come more quickly. We may or may not have reached our financial goals. We may or may not have children. We may have good health or poor health. Our vocation may be satisfying or frustrating. And all of that is to say this, basically. it's not contingent on everything going on around us. It's not life circumstances that have to do with whether our marriage is good, bad, summer, spring, winter, fall. But if our marriage is in the season of summer, we will share a deep sense of commitment and satisfaction, and we will feel secure in each other's love. Which is to say, however all of those things are going on around you, finances, work, all of that stuff, however that's going, you feel like there is someone that you are going through this life together with. And there is someone who you are connected with and you can understand. And again, as we've talked about throughout this series, yes, these things all apply within marriage, but I think we can see pieces of this just in regular life and other relationships too. When you are going through the difficulty of life, it is one thing to go through that difficulty alone and feeling like you are isolated from everyone else. It's something totally different to feel like there is a family around you or friends around you or a church family around you that is helping you, walking alongside you, going through these things together. And so what we see in other things of life, we also see here in marriage. As we've described each of these seasons, we'll do that again tonight. The emotions of summer. Happiness seems kind of obvious. When things are going well, you tend to lean more towards happiness than the other direction. Satisfaction. You feel like things that you have tried to do to make your relationship better, those things are paying off. And maybe sometimes it's dumb luck, maybe sometimes it's the providence of God, or maybe sometimes it's the work we're putting in, but you feel satisfied with what your marriage is. And because of that, maybe there is a sense of accomplishment that goes with it. You think to yourself, okay, there are ways I used to react to situations, and I don't do that, or at least I don't do that as frequently as I once did. There are times where I would not notice something that happened, and now I'm a little more apt to notice that happened. There are times where my spouse was struggling with things, and I didn't pick up on it quite as quickly. Maybe now I'm starting to see it a little more clearly. And then there's this feeling of connection. This is a phrase my wife has used a lot throughout our marriage. Every now and then she will say, I don't feel like we're connecting well. And I will tell you, as the guy that we'll talk about later here in the sermon, but as the guy who sometimes is just content to just sit and be quiet, and people can be there or not be there, and it's all fine. I'm an introvert by nature, and I'm very content with silence. And so sometimes I don't even realize I'm not connecting because I feel very self-connected, I guess. I feel like everything is fine, and I don't know there's this thing I'm missing out on. But when marriage is in summer, there is this feeling of connection. The attitudes of summer. Trust. When you feel like things are going well, when you feel connected, you are more apt to have trust, maybe less questioning about motives, less questioning about lots of things. You have a commitment to growth, okay? You like this so much, what you want to see is more of this. And in other aspects of life, I think we see this pretty clearly. If you start an exercise regimen, and you feel like when you started it, you were winded when you went up the stairs. And then somewhere along the way, you begin to feel better. And so it starts to kind of cycle on itself at some point if you keep it up long enough. And you feel like, man, I feel better. I want to do more of this. Marriage can be the same kind of thing. As things are going well, as you feel more connected, that trust builds into a commitment to growth. And then also you feel relaxed. Isn't it great to have a place where you can go and just kind of let your guard down? And for a lot of folks, marriage did not begin there. It began, for most of us, probably with dating somewhere along the way. And what was the first date? The first date was you wanted everything to look right. You wanted everything to go right. You wanted to make sure you were presenting the best version of yourself. It's almost like the job interview for life. You just wanted to go in there and make sure everything is just right. And then somewhere along the way, you begin to see the full picture of the other person. Somewhere along the way, you begin to let your guard down, and that happens in different times for each of us. But there is this point where you just can be kind of relaxed around someone. And again, we all have people in our lives beyond marriage that are kind of like that. There are people that if they're coming to your house, you freak out and you start throwing things in closets and picking things up and make sure everything's put away. And there are other people that when you find out they're coming to your house, you say, they know what I'm like. They know who I am. And they're going to come and they're going to be fine because their house looks like this too and everything's good. And what we want with marriage is to kind of reach that point where we can just be ourselves with each other. It's not that we don't care. It's not that we don't put forth an effort, but we let the guard down a little bit. The actions of summer. We communicate constructively. Maybe a hard thing to say a few times fast, but communicating is one thing. Communicating constructively is something entirely different. I can communicate with you in a quality control mode and tell you everything that is wrong with something that has happened, or I can communicate with you in a way that hopefully encourages you and builds you up and is honest with you, and so we want to communicate constructively. Secondly, we accept each other's differences. It did not take us long in married life to realize we did not do everything in the same way. We had been single adults for a little bit before that, and because of that, we had developed a way that things are supposed to work in the home where we lived, the way our cars were, the way we went about life, the way we went about work, and everything. And pretty quickly within all that, we began to realize we are not the same person, and we look at life differently. And so you begin to accept that. Number three, marriage seminars and books. I will immediately divide the crowd on this. There are those of you that love this stuff. There are those of you that hate this stuff. And I will tell you, by the way, I completely understand both of you because I have been to marriage seminars that were great and that I walked away from thinking there are a lot of things here that can really help us have a better marriage. And I've been to some that I thought that was a colossal waste of 2 days. And there's really nothing in there that I'm pulling from that I think is worthwhile. And the funny thing is, by the way, if we were all to go to those 2 marriage seminars together, we would probably split on that too. And there would be those of you who would think the one I thought was worthless was the best thing ever, and the one I thought was great was a complete waste of time, and everything in between. And the same thing with books, by the way. There will probably be some of you, because we've talked about this book for a few weeks, that will go out and buy it, or you will get it on Audible and listen to it. And there will be some of you that think, Brian made that book sound a lot better than it really is. And there will be some of you that think, Brian really undersold this, and there were a lot of things in here he should have covered that he didn't. But what we do know is when we see things like this, and maybe it's a seminar, maybe it's a book, maybe it's you follow some sort of a website where they give little tips about how to make your marriage better, if you're trying to do something and make it better, you pay attention to it. If you're someone who cares about a hobby of some kind, you read up on that hobby, you learn about that hobby, you watch videos about that hobby, whatever it is. If there's an interest you have, athletics or finances or whatever it is, you read things, you look at things, you learn from people that make you know more about those things. And marriage is the same kind of deal. When you're in summer, and this is the flaw, by the way, in the way most people think, when do you think you need to read a marriage book or go to a marriage seminar or go to marriage counseling? And everything's falling apart. If you pick up this book and read it, by the way, he begins in winter because most people he sees in counseling are there. It's not usually the people where things are going well that do this, but what he found in his research is the people where things are going well and they do these things go better, and they actually are able to do well. And then number fourth, growing spiritually. And this is as a couple, and this is also individually. We are people that when this relationship is going the right way in summer, heading in the right direction, we tend to grow spiritually, both as a couple and as individuals. The climate of summer. We are comfortable, and maybe some of these overlap a little bit, but I think they're still worth saying. We are comfortable, we feel attached. I know that sounds probably a lot like connected, but they're similar ideas. We are supportive of one another. And so when your husband or wife comes to you and they say something to you that just sounds like the weirdest idea you've ever heard, or you don't understand why on earth someone who seems so intelligent would say something like that, you don't lead with that. Instead, you try to take it in and you're supportive of whatever it is, and sometimes it's a good thing, by the way, or sometimes as they continue to explain, you begin to see something that you did not see before. And number four, understanding. We are going to be people who seek to understand one another. Whether we are eye to eye from the beginning or whether it takes a little time to get there, we're going to try to understand and see the world from the other person's point of view. And that plays out, I believe, in a few things relationally in Scripture. First of all, in Proverbs 27:17. And we have probably read this verse in any context other than marriage, but I believe it really applies to marriage as well. Iron sharpens iron and one man sharpens another. Now get out of the man language for just a minute here and understand that when we see man in Scripture, we're talking about people in general. And so people sharpen each other. So who would sharpen each other the most, you think? It's those people you're around the most. And if you are a married couple, who are you around just by the nature of marriage the most? Your husband or wife. And so you are going to be people who challenge each other to be better. When I look back through my life, I've encountered some really great people in life. I have spiritual mentors who brought me to Christ, brought me to ministry, brought me along in life in different ways. I have people that when things have gotten really hard, I've gone to them and talked to them, and they've encouraged me through situations or rebuked me when that was what was needed. If you were to ask me today, Brian, at the point you are in life right now, who has had the most impact on making you better than you were before, it's the person sitting right there. There's no one else that's even close. And I've had some pretty good people in life. And I like to think that maybe I've played some impact there with her too. I don't know. Not as much as I would like to, I'm sure. But we make each other better. And there are a lot of times where I will get upset about something and I will construct a strongly worded email that I'm going to send to someone and just show them the error of their ways and how right I am. And I will first show that to my wife, and she will say, yeah, that's not a good idea. And I will start hitting the backspace button and deleting the email. It felt really good to write it, by the way, but it never gets sent. There will be times where I will say, how does this sound? And she will say, that doesn't sound the way you want it to sound. There'll be times where I ask a question intending to convey one thing, and she will say, this could be taken in that way. And it makes me better than I was before. There are times when I try to reason through something, and it makes sense to me, and I rationalize my way through it, and I'll ask her what she thinks, and she will help me see something I've never seen before. Now, the beauty of being married to somebody like Stacy is she will do these things about 99% of the time in an unbelievably friendly, unassuming kind of way. And so you don't even realize what she's really kind of done is corrected me. But it was done in such a spirit that I realized she just loves me. And she's just doing this thing to try to help me be a better version of me. And so iron sharpens iron, one sharpens another. So help each other be better in marriage. This is a part of what summer marriage looks like. Secondly, in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 11, we read, finally, brothers, rejoice, aim for restoration, comfort one another, agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. So secondly, aim for restoration. As we are discussing, as we are disagreeing or agreeing, as we're trying to work through an issue, whatever it is, our aim is restoration. Our aim is not bring down their defenses so that they can see things my way. Your aim is not, I am so right in this and she is so wrong in this, or he is so wrong in this for wives, and I am just going to try to make my case in such a way that they finally will give in and do it my way. That is not the goal as we are married. The goal is restoration. The goal is, as he also says in this verse, peace. And we'll see a little more of that here in a second. In Romans 12, Paul says, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So live in peace. Can we sometimes completely disarm the other person and make our point because we are right and they are wrong? Absolutely. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are right and they're wrong, but we could probably paint things in such a way that we are. Sometimes maybe we are. Maybe we're right and they're wrong. But in the way we go about it, is it combative? Is it argumentative? Or is it done in such a way, aiming for restoration, that we're trying instead to live in peace? There are ways we can discuss things, as much as we may differ on it, that will be done in a peaceable way instead of in an argumentative kind of way. And we'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute too. And in Colossians chapter 3, verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. And I truly believe that if you live in peace, that peace is going to bring right along with it thankfulness. You will find that so many of those things that once created tension can instead be something that you were working through together. We talked a little bit last time about the idea of it's not me against you, it's me and you working through this together to try to be better. Sometimes it feels like me and you against the world around us, but we are always together on the same team. And if we have the peace to be on that same team, we will be thankful as a result. Now, the downside of summer, yellow jackets, these guys. There is, as good as things are going, there are always bad that come along with it. Now, for us at our house, by the way, it's wasps. I don't see a lot of yellow jackets out at our house, but the wasps love our back patio. And these gigantic red wasps love to just fly along the surface of our yard as I'm mowing, just to make me tense as I'm going along. And I think, okay, I'm watching for you. I'm trying to figure out where the nest is. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And every time I think of this, I think of golfing in Searcy when we lived there. I would go on Saturday mornings at 7:30 to the River Oaks Golf Course with a group of people. I was the young guy in the group, if that tells you anything about what the group was like, but not that much younger than those other guys. There was a guy named Glenn who was a psychology professor. I don't know if golfing with a psychology professor is wise or not, because sometimes you'll hit a shot into the lake and he will look at you and say, how did that make you feel? And it didn't make me feel very good. There was another guy, Dennis, and he worked for AT&T and had been working for AT&T for decades at that point. There was a guy named Scott who was a football coach and Scott was the best golfer of all of us. All of them, by the way, were better than I was, which I think is why they invited me. But I was there in that group. And then there was a guy named Keith who was a chemistry professor. And all of these guys were, I don't even want to guess at their age, but they were, probably had 10 years on me anyway. And we're out golfing one day, and all of those guys usually tended to keep it in the fairway most of the time, except for me. I have a violent slice that you never know where it's going to go, and so I will always be careful with that. And usually if anybody's in the woods, it's me, looking for the ball that I've just driven into there. Keith hit one probably about 8 or 10 yards off the fairway one day, which was unusual for him. And so Keith kind of went off to the right, and we were watching Keith as he went over there. And Keith found his ball over there in some leaves, and he got ready for a shot. He was kind of lining it up. And then all of a sudden, we see Keith just start dancing around and swinging his golf club like this. And we thought, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen a chemistry professor do. We're all watching him thinking, what is going on? And what we found out is Keith's ball landed right next to a yellow jacket nest in the ground. And so as Keith lined his shot up, he felt the first one. And then he felt the second one. And as he began swinging was around the time he felt the third one. And by the time he ran completely away from his ball, didn't care about the shot or anything like that anymore, and got back over to the center of the fairway, and they were still chasing, by the way, because those things are mean. He'd been stung about 10 times. And Keith, man that he was, kept golfing. I would have cried and walked away, but he kept going. But he always remembered that day. Every time we got to that hole from that point on, he remembered the Yellow Jackets. And the thing about the Yellow Jackets is you don't generally see it coming. They're in a hole in the ground. It's kind of hidden. It's not like the big nest you can see hanging from a tree or the corner of your house. And so there's just this little unassuming hole in the ground, and then all of a sudden these stinging fire bugs come out of it, and they just chase you down. And sometimes the summer of marriage can be like that. Everything is going well. Seems like everything is just perfect. Seems like you could be the people writing the marriage books or the people giving the marriage seminar. You should be the people up here preaching right now. And then something just out of nowhere comes and gets you. And so we need to remember, even in the summer of marriage, whatever season we may be in, you have to stay aware. You have to kind of keep your eyes open, realize what's going on, and when you feel that first sting, don't wait to see. Start to do something at that moment and start to try to make things better than they are. So in the book, as you get towards the latter part of the book, the author Gary Chapman talks about 7 ways that we can change the seasons. And this can be if you are in spring and everything's a little too ideal and you just want to drive towards summer. And I think that's kind of the driving point of the book. People want to be in the summertime of marriage. It's not the brutal Oklahoma summer heat of marriage, but it's the nice, off at the beach, you're out of school, the schedule's a little more lax. It's the good of summer. And people want to drive that way. And whether you're in winter, even if you're thinking, man, fall seems a little better than winter, you're really wanting to get to summer. And so he talks about how do we change those seasons. And first of all, we have to deal with past failures. And this is done in a lot of ways. There are actually steps within this first step, which may be cheating a little bit with him in the book, but I think they're worth looking at. First of all, you have to identify the past failures. Now, here's where the struggle comes in. We are really good at identifying our spouse's past failures. Now, you may not do it out loud because you're wise, but you know. You know where they've fallen short. You know where they can do better. You know the mistakes they've made. You know when they do something, there's a little Rolodex. Remember those? There's a little Rolodex file in your head, and you start going through that, and you think, this is just like when they did this back in 1984. This is just like when they did this thing 3 weeks ago, and I could have told you it was coming. It's that "see, I told you so" part of marriage, and you know it's there. And so, first of all, the identifying of past failures is not the other person's. We may get there, we may be able to work through those things together, but we begin with ourselves. It's the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye? And again, Jesus uses the word brother, but this is just that other person that you're going through life with. Why do you see the speck in their eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there's a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. In the book, he gives an example of a specific couple that he's talking to, and the wife has figured out that all of the problems in their marriage are the husband's fault. And in her mind, it very much is. And Gary Chapman, as he's counseling with her, brings this verse out. And she says, you don't understand. There are so many logs in his eye. It's like a lumberyard out there. There's just log after log and log. And he's got to work through all that stuff before we even worry about, my stuff is so small, it's not what's causing the problems in marriage. Now, we would look at this from the outside, and we would think to ourselves, who is this person? And let's all get mirrors out, because sometimes this person is us. And we feel like, the problems I bring in, they're really kind of small, relatively. I mean, I'm not that difficult. I'm easy to live with. It's all good. And this woman has really convinced herself of that. And so the way he tells her to go about starting to open her eyes to things a little bit is to make a list. And to make a list of not her husband's faults at first, but maybe some of her own, some things that she feels like she could do better. And then to make a list of her husband's, to make it a little more in the sense of not, you're doing this, but when you're doing this, I feel this. I feel this because of this thing. And then to begin to talk to people around her in life. Her kids, family, in-laws, parents, all of that stuff, and say, what do you see that I could be doing differently than I am? And through the process of all of this, she begins to realize, yes, he has flaws. Yes, there are logs for him. But I have some stuff too. And I have to be honest with myself and identify these failures. This requires looking at ourselves first. Don't fall into the temptation of looking to the other person as all of the problems. Look to yourself first. And we may do it in this way. This is the way the psalmist puts it. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This is, I read a book a year or two ago called Dangerous Prayers. This is one of the dangerous prayers the author talks about. When you tell God to search me and find the problems, that's a scary prayer, because God knows. He knows where they're all at. And if you really want to know, I believe he will find ways to show you that. But what if within marriage we said, search me and help me see where I could do this better. Help me see where I'm falling short in all of this. Secondly, we confess our past failures. Once we've identified them, we have to be able to acknowledge and then show the other person that we acknowledge them as well. In 1 John 1:9, John says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. I will admit to you, on the front end of all of this sermon series, as I started looking, immediately I wrote down Ephesians 5:21 through 26. Okay, there's marriage. I wrote down leave and cleave. I wrote down stuff about where marriage is split up that Jesus talked about, and I thought, man, how much more does the Bible really say about marriage? How much of what we see about relationships in the Bible applies within marriage? Just things in general of who we are to be, how we're to interact with each other, and I believe this is one of those. We have to be willing to confess to one another where we're falling short with each other, and that will be the way that we begin to change these past failures. Third, forgive, and I mean truly forgive. Jesus says, pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him. If your husband or wife sins, rebuke. But then if they repent, forgive. Be willing to let go of that. And Paul says, as he's talking in 1 Corinthians 13, he's talking about love. He says it's not rude, it does not insist on its own way, it's not irritable or resentful. And we'll find in the NIV, by the way, it keeps no record of wrongs here in verse 5. That's tough, isn't it, to keep no records of wrongs? We have that file in our minds. We know the wrongs. We know each other better than anybody else does most of the time. So these things cannot be used in disagreements anymore. Once we have found them, once we have confessed them, once we have forgiven for them, they are gone. And as much as it would help you win the argument, and we talked about, I think all the way back in week 1, you never really win the argument. But as much as you think it will help you win the argument, you cannot bring it up. If everything within you says, this fits the case perfectly, you got to let it go. Because when you do bring it up, what you are telling your spouse is it is never really forgiven. It's always there. It's always ready to be used as ammo in the argument. And because of that, nothing that we have done to this point matters. So you have to let it go. Number 2, back in our series of 7 things, choose a winning attitude. This sounds like it should be in like a self-help, team building kind of thing, but I think it applies within marriage too. We can choose the attitude in which we go into these things. We can be negative about it, we can be positive. So first of all, in this, we have to acknowledge our negative thinking. All of us have at least a little bit of this. Some of us have way, way too much of it. But a lot of us have it just a little bit. We're positive most of the time, but there are still things that kind of set us off. And so we have to acknowledge that. Secondly, we have to identify our spouse's positive characteristics. There was, whether it was last year or 55 years ago, something that caused you to fall in love with your spouse. And there are most likely a series of things that cause you to fall in love with them. And in the times in marriage where you were in summer, if you're not in it currently, or you were in spring, if you're not in it currently, there were reminders of all of those things. So you need to re-remind yourself of that stuff. We all have them, I hope, by the way, something positive that our spouse can see in us. And sometimes, by the way, we turn that into negatives if we're not careful, if we're thinking negatively. My wife has a tendency to help people all the time. And sometimes that will cause her, I feel like, to overextend herself, and then I worry about her because I feel like she's saying yes to too many things. And so I have this struggle of balance of how do I try to encourage while at the same time remembering one of the things I really like about my wife is that she does things for people. One of the things that drew me to her, Nathan actually brought it up at lunch today. When we were in college and I was roommates with the guy she was dating, which is a funny story for another day, she would, when he would come back to town after he had graduated, he would stay in my dorm room. And we were far from even beginning to date at that point. She would make me lemon bars every time that would happen to thank me for letting him stay in my dorm room. And it just became kind of this thing. And everybody from my hall would suddenly show up when he came to stay, not to visit him, but to eat lemon bars. And it was because she does things for people. That's just kind of her nature. And so I have to remember these positive things. For you, if you struggle with that, stop and think, why did I fall in love with him or her? And all that stuff is probably still there. Third, focus on these positives. Okay, you can choose what you're going to focus on. And so choose instead to focus on the good things. And number 4, see your spouse biblically. And what do I mean by this? As we talked about this morning, and I love that these tie together with what we're talking about tonight, you also be patient, establish your hearts for the coming of the Lord. Here in James 5, the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. See them not in a way that's grumbling, but in a way that's positive. Have patience with them and understand that God is watching what we're doing within our marriage. See them biblically. And then learn to speak their love language. We talked a little about this, I believe, in week 1. We'll just kind of hit it real briefly here again. We all receive love in a different way. And each of us has a language, and we generally assume everyone else is geared the way that we're geared. And so the thing that shows me, that my spouse does, they showed me love, then what I'm supposed to do is reciprocate by doing that exact same thing. Now, if you speak the same love language, that's great. If you don't, you will do that same thing over and over and over and over again, thinking you're showing love and you're not doing a thing because they're not receiving it in the same way. And so these languages, words of affirmation, okay, you say kind things about them, kind things that you mean. Acts of service, you do things just because, or you do things you know that they notice when you do them, they appreciate when you do them, and they can be big or they can be small. And I will tell you, by the way, a lot of times the small ones are what carry the weight. Number 3, receiving gifts. And be careful, by the way, if you can't afford this, to price yourself out of this. They don't have to be expensive gifts. You can buy things that are within what you can afford. And by the way, now that you're married, that's their money too. And so you will find that they probably don't want you to spend way more than you have to do that. You can still give other gifts. Number 4, quality time. Sometimes we just need to spend time with each other. And number 5, physical touch. And this is just, I love seeing the arm around the other at church. I don't do that nearly as much as I should. I love when I remember walking through the outlet mall in Foley, Alabama, that probably a lot of you people have been to if you've gone to Gulf Shores at some point. I remember walking along there when I was in college, and I looked ahead of me, and there was a couple ahead of me holding hands, and then I realized it was a deacon and his wife from church. And there they were walking along holding hands, and they had been married for probably 30 years or so at that point, and I thought, it's kind of cool to see. And I filed that away in my head. That's kind of a neat thing, and for them, this was one of their love languages. And if you don't know what his or her love languages is, there are a couple ways you can figure this out. One, you could ask. Okay, you could get the book if you want to, or you could probably find a blog online that explains each of them, and then ask, which of these matters the most to you? I really want to know. Or secondly, if you don't want to be that out front about it, I think you will find it in what they complain about. Now, I know we never complain to each other as husbands and wives, but if you have ever heard from your husband or wife, it seems like we never spend time together anymore. You have just received a hint that their love language is quality time. Or you just never lift a finger around here to help me with things. Well, they've just let you in on their love language is those works, those little small things that they show. There are so many ways that we can see these things. You go off on a trip, you come back. Did you bring me anything? Gifts. That has been the way they have seen it in life. so you can find in life that these are the ways that people show love. So how does God love? And maybe this is kind of core to what love looks like. He loves in this way. In Romans 5, we learn that God shows his love for this, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So we don't wait for the other person to do this first. I hope you're not looking at this list and thinking to yourself, like a lot of people think during sermons and sometimes, man, so-and-so really needs to hear this. Or now that we're talking about marriage, I am so glad my husband is finally hearing all this. I'm so glad my wife is finally hearing all this. And maybe it's good that they are. I'm not discounting that. But be the one to begin to show love to the other person. Be the one to begin to show these changes to someone else. Earlier in the chapter, he says this, and hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our spirits through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Have you ever considered that when we give love to others, it is the Spirit of God that is flowing out of us? What are the fruit of the Spirit? Where does it begin? Love. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. It's those things. It starts with love. So when we're making effort to show love to our partner, not just in the way we see it, but in the way they receive it, then the Spirit of God is working through us. And then develop the power of empathetic listening. And that looks like this. First of all, see the world from his or her point of view. It is one thing to see things from your point of view. You've done it for your whole life. It's one thing to see things from your family's point of view because they've grown up and kind of instilled these things in you. But can you see things from your husband or wife's point of view? Don't make statements that shut down the conversation. If you finally get the talking going, don't make absolute kind of statements that end the talking. You've been trying so hard to drive to that point. Once you get there, be very cautious, and hopefully we'll reach the point of comfort too, but be cautious about not shutting it down. And he gives the example in the book that I just love about the Dead Sea versus the babbling brook. The Dead Sea, I know we're familiar with it in the Holy Lands because we see it on all those maps. You've got the Sea of Galilee at the top, and then the Jordan River, and then the Dead Sea down there at the bottom. The way the Dead Sea works is the Jordan River flows into it, and nothing flows out of it. It's just there, and that's why it's the Dead Sea. And so it's just kind of this stagnant, salty, if you go there, I've been told you can float on top of it. I've never been, but I've seen pictures of people doing that. It's a very unusual kind of thing. There are people in life that are the Dead Sea when it comes to conversation. They take everything in, and then it's just kind of there. I can be that a lot of the time if I'm not careful. And then on the other end, there is the babbling brook. It's a constant. Everything that happens in the day, we need to talk about these things. Everything that's going on in life, we need to talk about this stuff. And the irony of it all is generally they marry each other. And we all know couples like this, by the way, where it seems like one of them just kind of stands there all the time and the other one talks all the time. And you wonder what the other one's thinking, but they never really talk. And so there's this struggle when it comes to communication. Because one of them will talk so much and the other one will not. And what we have to realize is in the midst of this is if we're the babbling brook, sometimes we have to stop for a minute and listen. Or if we're the Dead Sea, sometimes we have to offer an actual thought from time to time. And that's how the conversation continues. Proverbs 18 says this, Proverbs 18:2, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Okay, we can just constantly talk and never hear anything, or we can try really to listen to each other. How do we listen empathetically? We understand. We seek understanding. If we looked at aiming towards resolution before, here we're seeking understanding. Secondly, we're withholding judgment. Someone across from you will say the craziest thing you have ever heard, and it's hard not to betray that with your eyes and your body language, isn't it? But you just have to take it all in and then say, okay, well, this is what I'm hearing you say. And then there's the affirming. Is there something good in what's being said? Is there something I can agree on with what's being said? And only once that other person feels affirmed, then we begin to share what we're thinking. We begin to share, maybe sometimes it's correction, maybe sometimes it's reaffirmation, maybe sometimes it's a different point of view, or maybe sometimes it's how can we work towards that together. Our trouble in listening most of the time is we're ready to share about 6 seconds in. We've heard the first statement, we're already beginning to build our response to it, and then we just jump right in to share. We've got to do all these things that are in between. And then we have to discover the joy of helping our spouse succeed. Are we going to be people who try to make the other better, or are we going to be people who just kind of go through this life just like two ships kind of going off to their own destination? And how do we do that? We do that with 3 questions. First of all, what can I do to help you? Okay, if you don't know how to help your spouse succeed, ask. And maybe this seems like a weird, unusual question, and it probably will be the first time, but it's a good place to start. So first, what can I do to help you? Second, how can I make your life easier? I would like your life to be better than it is. What can I do to help with that? And third, how can I be a better husband or a better wife? I really want to be better than I am. And if you've not had these conversations, maybe a little shocking at first, but probably the kind of conversations that we need to have. And Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5 says, therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. And in Proverbs 12 we read, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. This communication that we're beginning to change makes us happier, makes us better, makes life more fulfilling. Next, we need to maximize our differences. God did not make us all the same, did he? We are different people. We are not the same, and I think most of us will find that if you married someone that was just like you, it would drive you crazy. That person's really hard to deal with. And they see things in the same, you think, why can't you see things my way? But sometimes that seeing things your way is exactly what you don't want. And I want you to think about it, 1 Corinthians 12. When we read the description of the body, you've got all these different parts, they're all working together for a whole. Marriage is kind of a smaller version of that, isn't it? There are strengths that each of you bring to the marriage relationship. There are things that one of you cares about that the other doesn't necessarily, unless you see it through the eyes of the other person. There are things that some of you are good at that the other is not. And as we come together as a couple, then we begin to work to maximize those differences instead of being frustrated by them. In Romans 14, Paul says, so then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. And where does that begin? Within the marriage relationship, obviously. It is who we are to be as people who are building one another up. Then implement the power of positive influence. We want to be people that are positive instead of negative. Positive choices, the way he describes it, positive choices lead to positive actions that result in positive feelings. Okay, so we begin by choosing to be more positive. And this is really a conscious choice. Now, I think you can do it enough, it becomes habit. But in the beginning, especially if you're a negative person, you really have to choose to be positive about something. I was reading a book the other day that really drove this home in my mind. And I will tell you that by the time I was done reading, I even told someone else about it and explained kind of what it was saying. It didn't take long before I was right back where I was. And something happened that frustrated me, and I began going down the road that I would normally go down, and I stop and think, okay, I can choose to interact with this differently than I do. So we begin by, when our husband or wife frustrates us, to choose to be positive, and that positive choice leads to a positive action. I think you will find when we are less negative with each other, a lot of the negativity you see in the other person begins to get more mild, and maybe begins to disappear entirely. And these things result in positive feelings. Don't you love being around positive people? People that make your day better, people that make you happier, people that encourage you and build you up? What if we began that at home? What if we would begin at home by being people who are more positive? And again, as we looked at this morning, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Do not grumble. How much grumbling do we do in the course of a week? We may feel justified in it and right in it and everything else, but when we are so characterized by grumbling, our marriages are not going to get better. And Peter says, put away all malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. We want to be people who are changing toward a positive direction. Now, I don't know what this looks like in your marriage. I don't know what season you're in, and maybe that's a good place to start. And I will tell you, by the way, if you have the guts, if you've not done it already during the course of this, to look at your husband or wife at some point this evening and say, what season do you think we're in? First of all, you may be surprised by the answer. And I would ask you, in that spirit of empathetic listening, to hear it, to take it in, and to understand why your husband or wife feels that way. And maybe it's more positive than you feel. You know, maybe you're a wife who feels like you're in fall or even into winter, and your husband feels like it's summertime. This is all good, and you're frustrated by that. Hear why they think it's summertime. Or if it's the other way around and you feel like things are great and everything, they say, we're fall and we're dangerously close to winter, hear why that is and begin there and begin to realize we can work in a better direction. And then what your next steps are, I don't know what that is for you. I think you can find something within what we've talked about, whether it's just beginning to see things more positively or listen better, to see the good things about your spouse. Maybe it's something that does involve counseling or a book or a seminar. For those who are thinking ahead, and if you are having trouble within your marriage right now, I do not encourage you to wait until next spring. But we believe in this here at Southwest to the point that we are planning to have a marriage seminar here next spring. And I hope that will be something that enhances the marriages here. And I also hope, by the way, it will be something that you can look at the people around you, coworkers, friends, that maybe marriages are struggling or maybe they're good and they just want them to be better. And that might be a way that we connect with some of them in our community and bring them here to be a part of that. But we believe that marriages, however good they are, can always be better. And maybe a third thing we've not talked about enough during all of this is there are some really good marriages here at Southwest. There are some marriages we could look to, people that if they wanted to write books could write books, people that if they wanted to do seminars could do seminars, or people that we could just learn from their example. And I would encourage you, if you are struggling in marriage, to find some people who are like that. And vice versa. I would encourage you, if you have a marriage that you feel like, I understand a lot of these seasons, but I feel like our seasons are pretty good right now. We've worked through a lot of things, to be a couple that maybe comes alongside another couple and helps them along. Doesn't have to be somebody that you look at and you think, man, their marriage is a mess. It could just be somebody that you want to help along through life to get better. It's what we do as a church, isn't it? We see other people and we want to bring them alongside. We want to teach them. He will remember that if he remembers nothing else in life, being up here and leading singing with Dad. I mean, that's one of those moments. What if we in married life, what if we did some of that too? What if we had those moments where people came alongside us and helped us along with our marriages? I don't know where you are tonight, but I believe the first step is taking the first step. The first step is, as we talked about tonight, noticing, admitting that there are places that we are falling short and beginning to work on that. And I would encourage you to do that. That may not be a come up here kind of thing. It may not be a go to the back room with one of the elders and their wives kind of thing, or maybe it is. But begin somewhere tonight to make your marriage better than it is now. And even if your marriage is great, make it better and do things to help yourself stay in the summertime. Tonight, if you need to come to him for the first time, if you need to be baptized and to change your life in that way, you can do that. Or tonight, if there's something in life that you need to acknowledge and you feel like I've just not been living the way I need to live and I need for things to be better, we as a church family want to help you in that way. If there's something we can do for you in any way in your spiritual walk, please come while we stand and sing.